gonna get through this together. You and I, it's gonna be fine. Hi, I'm Kayla Amanda. Welcome back to my channel. Thank you so much for being here. Instead of forcing myself to make another revision vlog in which I suffer through Karen Asher's unending fucking romance novel revisions, I thought I would do some Preptober work this week and get a head start on my NaNo project. If you don't know, my story for November is a vampire romance novel set in this world that I want to explore once I'm eventually done with Shapeshifters. It's been adapted from a previous contemporary project that I was working on, and because of that, I have some idea of who my characters are and the main beats of their story, how they come together, and what I kind of want to happen for them. But I want to make sure that I have all of the connective tissue down really clearly, and that I've made sure my characters really work together and that they play off each other really well. I know that on AuthorTube, a lot of people don't want to show the nitty-gritty details of their plot as they're working on it. This is partially due to not wanting to spoil a potential audience and partially due to a fear that someone will want to take their plot ideas. But I don't really care either way. I don't think that most of the people who are watching AuthorTube are my readership necessarily, and if you are, I don't think it will be a surprise to you that I want my couple to end up happily ever after at the end of the book. And as far as stealing my idea goes, I don't think that meeting at your friend's wedding is a particularly original idea, whether or not it's vampires, so I don't think anyone wants to take it. And if they did want to take it and do a beat for beat retelling of the exact same story with the exact same characters, I actually kind of think that's interesting, and that we should do an anthology where we get a bunch of people just writing the same story from the same beats with the same characters and see the ways that a different author will tell the same story with a very different tone and a very different voice. So if you want to take my mediocre ideas, go for it. I don't think that's gonna happen, but they're yours if you want them, I guess.
Over the last couple of ideas that I've been playing with since working on Kira and Alex's book, I have discovered that writing into a very simple spreadsheet is actually what makes me happiest and keeps my brain the most focused and organized. I think it's because each little box, being its own contained idea, is really neat and clean in a way that my brain really likes, but it's also not fussy. When I was using the beat sheet template, that's a great template, and if you're at all interested in it, I will link it below. This is not a slight to that template. It just doesn't work for me because every time I would try to add a new row to add nuance or to insert a scene idea that I had between the beats, it would fuck up the formatting on the rest of the template. It would fuck up the formatting on the explanation part, and that disorganization and that messiness would make my brain crazy town banana pants in a way that made it really difficult for me to focus. So I would have to go fix the formatting issues and make it look neat again before I could go back to what I was doing. And that would totally break my flow and break my creativity. And I would not be generative anymore. So now I just take this a very simple spreadsheet. And what I do is I select a group of boxes because the teeny tiny little spreadsheet boxes are too small to write in. And I horizontally merge them. And then I make sure my text is wrapping so that if I do exceed the space of the box, it just opens up the box wider as opposed to running into the next column, which is also disorganized in a way that makes my brain angry. I justify my text to the left and I float it in the center because that's what looks good for me. Something else that I will do is go over a column and start a new row just for research. For this one, I will center justify the very top box because I think the titles should be centered. I don't know why. They just should. Fight me about it. And this I just use for research. So any notes that I want to make to myself about things that I want to look up later, but I know if I start looking into them now, I will totally break the flow on getting my plot out and getting my ideas down. So here I'm just making a note of something that I wanted for Lee's character. I wanted him to be a Viking of a very specific kind that I heard about in this one specific lecture, but I know if I go back and try to find that specific lecture and that specific point where Kenneth talks about it, I'm just going to get super distracted by listening to the lecture and by being interested in that history, and I'm not actually going to come back to this and finish working on my character stuff. So I have to stop and I have to not let myself do that. So we just make a note of what it is that I want to look up and I can go figure it out later and I don't forget it now. Because these are characters from a previous project, I'm adapting their love story into something for my vampire world. I do actually know a little bit about them and a little bit about what's going on for them, psychologically and emotionally, which makes it easy to do this part because I already know what Hannah's issues are and I've already figured out how I want to tie them into the world of my vampires. So Hannah is connected to one of the people who get married at this wedding. She used to be the roommate. She was attacked by a vampire in her apartment. She has a cool scar. And this is just like some notes about how she's like a cool, dope, rad lady who's like a little rough and tumble, a little rebellious. And she guards her heart by never getting emotionally attached to people, by putting up walls and just having flings. As you know, with Kara and Asher's book, I had a really hard time getting my dynamic for them right because I didn't make sure that they were cool, interesting people who would be attracted to each other aside from like plot reasons, like who would be attracted to each other because they're more than just hot and convenient to my plot. So I really want to make sure that I get that nailed down for Lee and for Hannah. I want their dynamic to feel believable and authentic. I want them to have this kind of opposites attract energy, Hannah being rough around the edges, a little rock and roll, and Lee being this really polished political vampire guy. His best friend and boss is executive CEO vampire bitch extraordinaire, and he fits into that like boardroom idea. So he's been in suits for so long that he basically forgot who he was prior to that. He forgets the rough around the edges warrior guy that he used to be. And I really want them to be good for each other. I want them to fulfill each other in ways that like helps make them whole. And I think that's what makes like a good dynamic for a romance. So for Lee, what this means is that she reminds him of that older version of himself, that version of himself who was younger and who was more carefree, who could relax and have fun and just like be a man in love with this woman who he thinks is like spectacular. She reminds him that he can be laid back and he doesn't always have to be politically on and careful. He can relax around her and let his guard down. But it's also really important for me that she has a reason to be with him. And so for Lee and for Hannah, what I want for them is that he does emotional labor for her, not in like a put upon way, not in an he has to fix her way. He's hundreds of years old and he can give her that perspective that she can feel is like steady and supportive and not overwhelming, not overpowering. It feels like armor, not a cage. So once I've figured out who they are and what their dynamic is, that she helps him relax and see the fun in the world and kind of remember that his very long life is not worth living if he's not having a good time doing it. And for her, he helps her feel supported and protected in a way that is not stifling and that allows her to process her feelings in her own way. I can move on to my plot shit and figure out how their story is going to fit into the beats that I already have. Again, because I have this story being adapted from something previous, I do kind of know what's going on. They meet at a wedding, they hook up. He saves her from a really fucking terrible date, and then at some point, she's gonna break up with him because things are too good. Because losing him would hurt her, and she's fucking terrified of being that vulnerable with someone. But as we start to flesh this out, there's things that do need to change based on the fact that they have been transitioned into this paranormal world of mine. So, like, in this world, she is best friends with his boss's fiance and now wife. So it doesn't make any sense that they would never have met. So instead of it being them meeting at the wedding, they're going to see each other in this like new fancy context for the wedding. And because this is a paranormal and because I get to add vampire shenanigans, you are absolutely fucking right. They are going to have, oh my God, we could have died sex. In my world, there's this like vampire cult. It's a whole thing. They have these drug-addled sort of Nosferatu-y style vampires who cause chaos and mayhem, and some of them are going to attack the wedding for plot-related reasons in another book. He protects her, and she's going to do something that in some small way helps and makes him think that she's like a cool badass. One of the reasons that I love paranormal romances so much, it's one of the few genres that I find most of them allow for everyone to be a badass. Everyone gets to kick a little ass, everyone gets to be tough, and that's something that I really value in my romances. I love ass-kicking chicks. But of course, because Hannah is a commitment phobe, she bails as soon as she possibly can. And because I want to sort of start seeding that Lee is this like thoughtful, caring guy, he is going to have slipped a favor into her bag because the wedding was disrupted. People didn't get their wedding favors. And at some point earlier in the night, they will have like talked about how cool they are. And he doesn't want her to miss out. So he like slips one into her bag and she finds it on her way home. And it's this moment of like, this does him nothing. He'd already sealed the deal. I was already going to sleep with him. This is just a thoughtful thing for someone to do. This is straight out of the original idea. I want him to interrupt a date that she was on, kind of play that like, how could you cheat on me game where you pretend you're already dating to like scare off the competitor, and she goes along with it because the date fucking sucks. So they kind of end the date together. He walks her home and she does not invite him up. Even though it was a lovely date, he doesn't get an invite. Then he is going to ask her out on a real date because he interrupted her date and her date sucked. She deserves a real date. He shows again that he is a thoughtful, considerate person. He asks her to do something that he remembers she was interested in. It's wonderful. It's a lovely date. And she is totally down to go for another round with Holly. But even though they're closer to her house than to his, they go back to his place instead of hers. Her place and her not letting him in is a symbol of her keeping her walls up. This is where we hit fun and games. They date, they have good sex, they have good chemistry. It seems like they would be perfect together. Despite all of that, despite really enjoying being with him, despite having fun with him, Hannah cannot let him in. She is too wounded to open herself up to that. Something I need is for him to like see where her wound comes from and see why it is she protects herself from him and won't let him in. So I want them to do something with her family. And I think in order to do that, I want her dad to have gone over her head and invited him to an event. She doesn't feel like she can uninvite Lee because that would hurt him, and she would then have to explain why she was uninviting him. So instead, she like sucks it up and they go to this event, and he gets to sort of understand like where her issues come from and see like who her parents are and how they are together and like why she's so afraid of letting someone in emotionally because her parents' relationship is so bad and she doesn't feel like emotionally supported in her family. So why would she feel emotionally supported by a partner? So he has this better idea of where her damage is coming from. She has allowed him to do some caretaking for her, and that means I need to drive these motherfuckers apart. They cannot be happy this easily. I need them to have a reason to break up. And I think that the best way to do that is to make sure that she freaks the fuck out about how much she likes him and how important he is to her. She realizes that not only has she allowed him to care for her, she has come to care for him. And if she loses him, she will not be okay. That will be a wound that she doesn't know if she can recover from. And that scares the fuck out of her. So because it's vampires and because I can, he's going to nearly die. Vampire shenanigans are going to rear their ugly head, and he is going to be in danger. He is going to be at the site of whatever the vampire shenanigans are, and she's going to know that it could have caused him grave bodily harm, and she could have lost him. So she freaks out about it. I'm not totally sure how I want to go with them meeting up after this event, if I want her to go to the site of the vampire shenanigans and find him there, or if I want him to come to her. But either way, he shows up at her apartment and she lets him in. She symbolically allows him behind her walls into her space because she is in love with him, and the idea of having lost him to violence scares the shit out of her, and she can't handle it, and she needs to be with him. So she lets him in. She lets him like be a part of her life in this intimate way that she has not allowed anyone else. And that is going to send her for an absolute fucking spin, which is perfect, which is exactly what I want, because I want them to break up for a little while. She ends things with him because it's too scary for her to think about commitment with someone who thinks about relationships in terms of decades, much less Lee, who is hundreds of years old and who can think about a relationship in terms of centuries. Does he want to turn her? Does he want to spend eternity with her? Like, that's too much for Hannah. So the next time they see each other, she is going to freak the fuck out and break up with him. And then something is going to happen, and Lee basically says, breaking up with me because you love me too much is really fucking stupid, and there is nothing worth having in this world if it's not love. So, like, fuck you, let's be together. And she's going to go for it because it's a romance novel and they're going to end up together. But this is like a huge problem because question mark is not the right thing to have between the dark moment, them breaking up, and them getting back together. I obviously need something here. Like, this cannot be question mark. It's unacceptable behavior. Between her breaking up with him and him being like, you love me and I love you, why aren't we doing this? This is ridiculous. There has to be a reason for them to be thrown together again, a reason for them to be emotionally available to each other. So what if they don't break up after the vampire shenanigans? They break up after she shows him like where her emotional wound is from. They break up after he sees what her parents are like and after she lets him comfort her. She let him into her apartment, which we know is her symbolically letting him into her walls, and into her life in a way that terrifies her. So when he brings up the idea of a life together, centuries together, she freaks the fuck out, and that's when they break up. And then instead of question mark, question mark, question mark, bringing them back together, him being in danger can bring them back together. Him being in a situation in which she could lose him forever, she could never get another chance with him, forces her to confront the fact that, yeah, the idea of losing him is terrifying. That's a wound that she could never heal if she lost him. But like, isn't it better to spend time with him while he's there and like while they can be together, as opposed to not being happy while she can for fear of being unhappy eventually?
So I don't know how long I'm going to use this system. I don't know how successful this system is going to be once I actually put it into practice with actually writing a novel. But November will be my test run for it, and we can see how well I actually do on it when I'm on a time crunch, trying to just push through it. But for the time being, this is really working for me. Obviously, there are still things that I need to figure out and details that I need to add, but with what I have now, I could write in November. Those details are not like large plot impacting details. They're the stuff that fleshes out a world, the stuff that adds texture, but doesn't need to be there in order for me to defeat the blank page syndrome. I could write this as it is and not have to worry about opening a new chapter or a new scene and not knowing what I want to write. Those are things that I can add in revisions. If I need to add more dates or add a little bit more nuance or conversations with their friends, I can go back and see those if I need to. I'm very happy with what I have now, and I'm very hopeful that it's going to make for a great, productive NaNoWriMo. I really like Lee and Hannah. I like them together, and I really want to do them justice. So I'm really hoping that this works for me. And I will, of course, let you know how it goes. So if you were looking for me anywhere else, I am pretty much everywhere as Kayla Amanda. That is Kaylughmanda. And I'll see you next time.